Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. As you can see by the title, we are discussing the movie of Passione d'amore, which I am terrible at pronouncing in Italian, basically translated to Passion of Love, the film that inspired Sondheim to write the musical. I just want to tell you here up front, I'm very excited to delve into this season. The episodes that I've already recorded have gone in very different and great ways than I even intended them to go. This show continues to be, for me, something that I'm kind of rediscovering all the time. The depth of what was attempted with this show now makes it so obvious of why it was reacted to the way it was back in the 1990s. I'm excited to share these with you. But this week, we're talking about the movie, so get excited for the rest of this season. And if you have not seen this movie yet, this is something that I do point out later in this episode, but there is a version of it on YouTube that you can go and watch right now, which I definitely highly recommend. So if you want to watch the movie first before me and Joel discuss it, by all means, I would recommend doing so. But even if you don't, you can still listen along and learn some wild things that this movie decides to do. All right, let's get into this week's episode. Joel DeCandio, thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you for having me back.
I mean, we are taking the time to look at some of the source materials for this musical, Passion, but I actually kind of want to start talking about the musical in general first. Do you recall the first time you came across the musical Passion?
Oh, God. I think when I was in high school. And I mean, that was really when I really started getting into Sondheim and started sort of diving into all of his stuff. And so I think that would have been when I probably watched the DVD, the recording of it first, and then really fell in love with the recording. And then I sang a lot of it in school. I sang a lot of Giorgio when I was in school.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And
sorry, in school when you say, like, still in high school or in
high school,
post-secondary?
After
okay.
When I was in art school.
I've recorded some future episodes here already, and something that a couple of people have brought up is like, it really depends when you kind of first fall in love with the show, because it's very much almost like a teenager version of love for a lot of this, where it's like very big and it's very emotional and everything is the end of the world. There is a small contingent of people out there that I've now learned that got like really into Passion when they were teenagers, and I kind of find that it makes sense after a while, but also really funny to think about this group of people like really locking into this esoteric musical that most people have never heard of.
Yeah, I mean, it was especially for I think also when you're in high school, when you're a teen, I mean, it's so dark and you love that. You eat that stuff up, And I think as I've gotten older, I've gravitated sort of away from like the intensity and the darkness of it. And sometimes I can't listen to it that much because it really puts you in a certain mental place. But what I've become more fascinated with as I've gotten older is the writing and the structure, which really, more than any of his other shows, fascinates me so much. Because
in what way? Like, what is it about the writing that invests you?
Just musically, I think it's so intelligent, and it's sort of his most operatic of scores, and his most classical leaning, and all these themes and motifs that weave throughout. And he talks about it being it's not a traditional musical. It's a rhapsody. It's one long flowing piece. I find that so fascinating. It's so non-traditional in its form and its structure, but it's also so intricate. And it's one of those pieces that every time I listen to it, it never ceases to sort of keep me intellectually stimulated.
Yeah, that point specifically is the part that I guess somehow I've missed that description of this show. But as soon as I read that about this being like a rhapsody, it's this one kind of long, sustained musical thought with like movements and themes and stuff that kind of comes and goes. It made so much more sense. I'm like, oh, of course that's what this is. Of course that's how like this is being structured, and why it does feel so odd. And in a way, I guess I'm not as knowledgeable to know if, and I doubt it is, but like that if it's the only one that's ever done it that way. But I almost wonder, it's like, oh, could someone else come in and try this again? Something that's like a little bit non-traditional, but still having that. It's just still a musical theater piece, but is a very different one than than most.
I think for sure. And I think one of the reasons why it works so wonderfully with this story is because it's this really long through line. It never, like musically, we never really resolve until
that's right.
So it just keeps elongating this intensity, which is what the story is about, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why the sort of the way it's written and everything, it goes so hand in hand. And I always say, I was talking about someone about this the other day. It sort of fascinates me that opera houses always do Sweeney, or sometimes they'll do night music. But it's crazy to me that they don't do Passion, because that was the one that makes sense for them, you know?
Totally. Yeah.
No one does
it's so funny. It's so funny that like Sondheim himself is very resistant to the opera label, mostly because he was kind of dismissive of it as a form. He just didn't enjoy it all that much. But I totally agree with you. It's like, of all of his pieces, I don't understand why this one isn't done at more opera houses.
It makes sense. I mean, it's the most operatic of his scores. There's a great recording. It's in German, but there's a phenomenal German recording of the show, and they did it with a full symphony orchestra. So it's much bigger than what you would get in any of the other cast recordings. Much bigger than like a Broadway recording, and it just sounds stunning. They reorchestrated it, worked with Sondheim to reorchestrate it for symphony orchestra, and it's not an operatic cast; it's a musical theater cast.
Oh, okay.
It's all in German, but it sounds fantastic.
I'm writing that down so I can check it out. Outside of the musical here, then, as I was kind of alluding to, there is essentially two pieces that this is drawing inspiration from. There's the original Targetti novel or novella that gets released in the 1800s, but primarily Sondheim is influenced by the movie that comes out in the early 80s. This is one of three, I guess. I think it's one of the three pieces that Sondheim like really goes to the map where like, I want to adapt this into a musical. Most of the other ones were other collaborators coming to him and trying to pitch him on the idea. But he watches this movie in the early 80s, falls in love with it, and is like, oh, I think this could absolutely be a musical piece. And then until he meets James Lapine and they have their collaborations, he figures like this is the one that we want to kind of go with. Now, of course, there is the book, and apparently, I only found this out very recently. There was no English translation at the time when they started work on this musical. So they actually had to contract someone to do a translation for them. But apparently it was very academically translated, like a very literal adaptation. And then the copy you can buy now, that there is a copy that has been translated in English, is that was not had anything to do with the musical. It was kind of done unbeknownst to them. It comes out in the same year as Passion comes to Broadway, so they were both working on this at the same time. I was going to quip this because it feels so much, you know, what a lot of high school students do when they're assigned a book report, and it's like, well, I'm not going to actually read the book. I'm just going to watch the movie and then make my report off of that. And that's kind of how Sondheim writes this musical. He doesn't really engage much with the story from the book side of things until after he was done writing what he wanted to write. And it was James Lapine who kind of brought more of the book stuff into, I think, their collaboration than anything else. Anyways, I think it's just a fascinating thing that there's two different people looking at two different adaptations and like trying to bridge them together into a different piece. When was the first time you watched the movie, or was it like this week when you watched it for the first time?
I watched it. I couldn't tell you when I first watched it. It was not terribly long ago. At some point last year was when I finally, because it's hard to find.
It is.
When I found it last year and watched it, it was around the same time I read the novel as well. So I was in a very passion mode. And the Venuti translation, the one that came out that you were talking about.
Oh yeah, same as me. Yeah,
it's really fascinating because it's the Venuti translation is done so beautifully, and also comparing it with the musical. It's really fascinating because there's all these lines. Clearly, I mean, they obviously used the film as the basis because it follows sort of the exact structure of what the film is. And the novella has much more as far as backstory between Giorgio and Clara, how they met, and Georgia's war and all that stuff. But there's such incredible similarity in the lines. There's so many lines in the film that are, you know, very similar to lyrics or lines in there. Like, you know, all love begins with a look. They talk about happiness all the time. Don't be ashamed of your tears. I love you for our tears, our little room, all that. But in the film or in the book, I mean, I have the book in front of me. You can literally turn to any page in here. It's wild. And here we are. I am so happy that I'm afraid of dying. Her most bitter regret was that she had not met me sooner. We were happy, ineffably happy. There's so many lines there where you can tell exactly, oh, this is where that lyric came from. This is where that line came from.
Yeah, totally. It is such a fascinating thing to do this deep dive in such a compressed amount of time, because it's like, oh, okay, I can see how that book then influenced this in the movie, which influenced this in the musical. Like there's like this huge through line. Like there's like the story of the butterfly that she uses as a metaphor that shows up in the lyrics and stuff like that. Which some of those lines feel like they're verbatim from the book.
Yeah,
so.
They really, as far as, I mean, it's very, structure-wise, it's very faithful to the movie. But writing-wise, the movie and the musical are both quite faithful to Arcadi's novella. I mean, very much so in the writing and the wording. I mean, it's beautiful, really gorgeous.
I think what helps out with that is that as far as like the plot, like just like what happens in this story, it's not like it's a lot of action. There's not like a lot of stuff that really happens. This is not really a plot heavy story that they're getting into. It's very much, because it's being written in letters back and forth, it's a lot of like, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling, this is, you know, what I'm going through right now. It's like, and we did this thing at the castle, or we walked through the garden and we had this conversation. And so I can see that being just a great opportunity for people who are adapting this work, especially for the stage and a musical, because you want people to be singing these like things of what they're feeling. We don't want something that's super plot mechanic heavy where you have to change a lot of stuff or cut things out. So that, I think, honestly, having now gone through this, that's the most surprising thing to me, is like how much retains the same between all three versions. There's not, as far as like, again, what happens from scene to scene, there's not a lot that changes. Yeah, no, it really, it's very tightly focused on that love triangle, on three of them. Hey everyone, just Kyle breaking into the conversation to tell you about some of the people that help this show continue to go. Now, if you'd like to help support the show for absolutely free, you can give a rating and review on whatever app you listen to podcasts in. That's, of course, greatly appreciated. However, Putting Together is an independent podcast, so if you'd like to help monetarily, which will only help to grow and make this show better, you can do so over at our Patreon page. Please do not donate if it impacts you negatively financially. One thing to point out, I'm sure you've heard other podcasters say this exact same thing. This is only going to matter for a certain few of you, I'm sure. If you're going to decide to donate through Patreon, please go to the website, meaning like you're going to like Safari or Chrome or Edge. I don't know what people use nowadays. And literally go to www.patreon.com and sign up through there. If you're using the app on an iPhone, like you've downloaded the Patreon app and you decide to donate through there, Apple is taking a 30% cut of that donation. So your full donation is not going to come towards me. If that's how you originally signed up, was through the app specifically, perhaps consider switching it over so that you've signed up on the website, just so that I am getting that full amount. Or you do you. At the end of the day, you can decide what you want to, on how and who you want to support. So let me give a huge thank you to the God That's a Good tier from Patreon. That's Alex, Barry, Christopher, David, Jack, Luis, Michael, Mika, Robert, Stephen, and Witty. All right, let's get back to the show. So for the film itself, to get into the meat of our conversation here, let me just do some credits. So this translated into English, it's called Passion of Love. But you, Joel, are going to have to help me out here because my Italian is not the greatest. Is it Passione di Amore? Like, is that how you say that? Passione d'amore. So that is what the Italian title of this is. And is directed, this is, again, I'm going to be so bad at this. Is it Ettore? Is that how I say his first name? Ettore Scola, who does have a very long career in Italian cinema and was lauded at the time. Me and Joel have both discovered that this is the only one of his movies that we have seen. So I cannot speak to any of his other films, unfortunately. So the very general starting place is just like, how do you like this movie? I absolutely love this film. I think it's so beautiful. And I think I will admit, I'm probably a little biased. I think part of the reason I love the movie so much is because I love the musical, and it is so similar, but I think it's so elegant. It's so elegantly made.
It's so beautiful. The cinematography is wonderful. There's some beautiful lighting choices. This chiaroscuro, this light dark, that feels very appropriate for Clara and Fosca. This like there's brightness and then shadows and then the setting, the sets and the colorings, the design, everything is just, it's really elegant. It's really beautiful.
I love how the costumes are also carried over into the musical too. Like they really took the time to like emulate some of the costuming that's from this movie into the stage show.
Well, I'm sure that was for similar reason too. So one of the things that Sondheim talks about in, I don't know, various things I've read, I guess probably the Hat books and the Mark Horowitz book, probably where he talks about him. But he talks about, this is a world that he is not obviously very versed in. It's another, country, another culture. And he talks about the bugle calls that you hear all throughout the film. And he decided to just sort of use those in the musical because he figured, well, Scola probably got authentic bugle calls, so I'm just going to assume those are authentic. And I feel like it's probably similar with the costumes. They're probably like, they probably did their research. We'll put them in ours. They
right. Yeah, they probably did it good enough. Yeah. We'll just take that.
But that is also, that's one of the real, where they're really faithful is through the whole film. There's these bugle calls in the background because they're on a military base. And throughout the whole musical, everything is connected through these bugle calls. The bugle calls make up one of the main musical themes of the score,
I mean, not as harsh, obviously, but it's very similar to like the steam whistle that goes through Sweeney Todd a lot of the time. It's those bugle calls kind of keep returning back into the plot. Before we get too far, one thing I should just call out, if people are interested in seeing this movie, it's kind of hard to track down. I was going to double check this. There was definitely a VHS that came out of this, and I think there is a DVD copy you can track down, but I remember when I was looking a few months ago, it was very expensive. However, you can watch this right now for free on YouTube if you so choose. And it's a very great high definition transfer someone uploaded. And I will put that link into the show notes. So if people want to check it out, they can. Just be warned that if you don't pay for YouTube Premium, you will get a commercial like every 8 to 10 minutes or so. But still, I think is worth it to go through and watch this movie at least once.
I mean, as far as free uploaded videos on YouTube, it is gorgeous quality. Someone did a really good job with that.
Really good job. Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way. I mean, again, I've only watched this once and it was now a couple of weeks ago. What I guess I was the most impressed by is kind of what we've just been saying, like that attention to detail. This feels like a very lived in world for me. Coming from the musical side of things, I guess what surprised me a little bit is that this is, for the most part, there's a couple of exceptions to this, but for the most part, it's really just a standard relationship drama that they've adapted this into. And there's nothing wrong with that. That sounded like a criticism, but I was thinking much more, it was going to lean more into the operatic side of things for some reason, when it really isn't. It's really just a straight ahead, this is the story, this is the drama, and we're going to visually kind of go through this.
It's interesting that you say that. Actually, one of the things that I love so much about the film, and I love the musical. It's probably my favorite Sondheim. But one of the things that I like about the music or the movie more than the original production is the sort of groundedness of it. And one of the things that really stood out to me is the film's portrayal of Fosca, because she's unattractive, but she's not melodramatically hideous. Do you know what I mean? And her speaking voice is really lovely, and she just sounds like any other young woman, just like Clara, And that's an aspect about the film that I like more than the original production of the musical, because it's very much her intensity that puts Giorgio off after a while. And it feels plausible than the elevated melodrama of the original production, which again, I do love. But something I love about the film is that she really feels like a real person. There's this element.
She definitely feels like a real person. I guess this is the thing I really like that the movie does. I guess when you say realistic, what's I think hard to translate, I think both the movie and the musical did this in a slightly different way. But when you look at the novel, it describes Fosca when she first appears to be like, emaciated, very skinny, corpse-like. Like that's kind of like the imagery that they're trying to use. I don't think they go that far in the movie, although she does have a striking resemblance to me. Well, a succubus or like a Nosferatu or something like that coming down the stairs, like the way her hair is done, even the way her cheeks are sunken in, that sort of thing. But you're right. It's not like, oh my God, this old crone has now walked into the movie here now. And like, there's no way that these people are going to fall in love by the end. It's a woman, a real woman who is sick, without like leaning too far into like, oh, she's so hideously ugly, which I think would maybe be the impulse of some other directors.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the things I really appreciate about the film, because it made me think about the musical in a different way, and it made me think about the characterization of Fosca in a different way. Especially, this is such a strange thing to mention that I mentioned earlier, but her speaking voice. I was just so taken by how lovely and how she sounded just like, you know, any other young woman, just Clara, because I was so used to the original production of the musical where everything is like this, you know. Love John Murphy, and like that is that production. That is that production. But it made me think about Passion in a different way, of like, oh, you could portray her as essentially an ordinary woman who is just very unfortunately afflicted.
Just as a quick sidebar, because I don't want to forget to mention this, having watched the few dozen Italian films that I have over the years, especially stuff that's like pre-90s, it's always hilarious to me because everything is dubbed.
I knew you were going to mention the dubbing.
Which means like the Italian film industry for decades did not record sound on set. They just recorded it, had the actors act, and then they would just record all the lines separately and then sync it to the scenes in the movie, which always throws me off because even the people that are Italian in this movie look like they're not speaking in time. Like there's just a slight offness to it, and that's just the case. Although I will say a lot of the actors in this are actually French rather than Italian, but that's what that was the strength. They could just have any actor speak any language they wanted to, and they would just dub them over anyways. It didn't matter.
Italian dubbing is so funny to me. I mean, it's still a very common practice as far as when you get, you know, films from other countries in. Italy, they you know, will do subtitles. Most countries will do subtitles, and they'll do full on dubs for them. I believe it was Isabella Rossellini. I was listening to an interview between her and Willem Dafoe, and she was talking about the dubbing, and she was saying they don't always let me do my own dubs because of my accent, which is so funny.
That's so funny.
But anyway. Yeah, I knew you would mention the dubbing. It actually took me a while into the film to notice it. I feel like sort of
it's done well. I mean, it's not distracting, I don't think, in this movie very much. And,
I think that especially the post-war, like neorealism, like that era of film. This is past that, but that was so much my, I think, introduction to the cinema world back, you know, when that I'm so used to the dubbing now because I've just watched so many Italian films, except none by Scola apparently.
Right.
So, feel a little bad about that. But yeah, the dubbing is, if you haven't watched, if you're not used to Italian films and you watch it, that's jarring.
It's weird, not to go too far down another tangent here, but because I do enjoy watching stuff that is, you know, not made in English, my thing is I always watch as best as I can, like 99% of the time. I always like to watch it for the first time in the original language, if that's a copy available. But I can't tell you how much whiplash I've had before of like watching something later on dubbed in English that I know in a different language, like, oh, they're not performing this in the right way. I just get it so ingrained in how someone's performed it before.
I can't watch anything if it's in a different language and it's dubbed into English. I would rather watch original language with subtitles. The English dubbing drives me insane. That would be mad, and because then their mouths never sync up.
They never do.
Oh,
no.
God.
So what I thought was interesting about my first watch of this movie, I guess to go back just a little bit as far as like my impression of the novel, I crammed through that book. I think that's partly the issue here is I raced through that book in like a day and a half. Like I read it very quickly. Not that it's huge, but I mean, I was mostly reading it to finish it rather than to enjoy it. And for me, at least on my first read, is I just didn't get there emotionally to fully believe is the wrong word, but I didn't fully get there emotionally for Giorgio's love of Fosca by the end. It felt like he was being drugged there by Fosca specifically without him actually having that moment that I feel like that does happen in the musical where he fully flips by the end of it. And he's like, this is a person that I do love, and contrasting it with how his relationship with Clara was at the beginning. And the movie really, I felt like, took the time for me to understand the Giorgio character a lot more. And I really felt his journey through it so much more, which is like the realization that Sondheim writes about in the Hat book. It took the production in London for him to see like, oh, this is a show about Giorgio. I didn't realize that. I was writing a show about Fosca, but it's actually a show about Giorgio. And I think the movie figures that out.
It does. That was actually something that I wrote a note about when I rewatched the film last night, is that I think the film adds a real layer of understanding to Giorgio and his toleration of Fosca. And also the doctor's complicity is very apparent too in the film. And the difference between where Giorgio is at the beginning and the end of the film is very clear and very massive.
So I don't want to get into fan fiction here, although I will if I need to. But this is something that I have now brought up 2 or 3 times in future episodes. And it's something I felt absolutely in the novel. And this underscores it for me in the movie. The musical, not as much. They don't spend a lot of time with this, but it's still there. The vestiges are still there. What is the deal with this doctor character? I don't feel like he's this benign figure in this story. There's something going on with that never fully reveals itself. But I feel like it feels like there's something nefarious at times that he is up to. For
sure. He's real complicit. He's there's a little malpractice going on there. I mean,
sure.
Like, it's interesting because you really get the sense that it's sort of an experiment for him, you know? And then it goes too far. And then he tries to walk it back. And it's like, no, this is actually all you're doing.
Right. It's like starting a fire. I'm like, well, I didn't mean it to burn down the forest. Like, well, sure. But like, you still started the flame here.
Yeah, exactly. That is exactly what this is.
Cool. So I want to go through some of these notes that you were writing down. What did you discover on this rewatch?
Oh God, what else did I write? I thought of this earlier when you were talking. The end of it, you were talking about how detailed the film is. The individual characterization of the soldiers. Just something that carries over into the musical a little, but they're not main characters, so we don't really focus on them. But in the film, you really do see their individual personalities when they're at that dinner table.
I agree. The novella does a little bit of that too, where they like kind of explain a little bit of backstory of each of the dinner guests type of thing. But the movie has the time to like visually show like, this is the guy who eats a lot, or this is the guy who is this kind of type of character. Yeah.
I mean, I love film so much and it's my favorite medium. And I think that's one of the reasons why, one of the reasons where film is really strong, because in a novel, if you want to do that, you do have to take time out of the story to talk about all these individual soldiers, even though that's not our main story. And in the musical, how do you really do that with keeping, under sort of keeping things concise? But in a film, you can tell that visually without really spending time on it. And they do that, and they do that very, very well.
They could just sing about uniforms. That would work.
Uniform.
I don't know what, that is literally the thing that gets stuck in my head every single time. Uniforms.
One of the other things I wrote was that I remember thinking this the first time I saw the film, was that Clara and Giorgio are so beautiful. They're both gorgeous. They're so beautiful. And the whole film itself is it's so beautiful and it's so romantic. And the intimate scenes between Clara and Giorgio are so lovely and so sweet. That first scene where she's like taking off his clothes and it's really beautiful. And every aspect about the film there's one really strong directorial vision. Making everything, even like the score, there's this beautiful classical romantic piano driven score that kind of goes through the whole film. That's really, really lovely.
I just imagine this director just going to his casting director and being like, so I'm thinking just like, get me 2 of the most beautiful people you can, and we're just going to film them. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, we can do that.
And they're wonderful. They're wonderful actors.
They're great.
They just also happen to be so stunning. You're watching the opening scene between them and you're just like, wow, these are the most beautiful people I've ever seen. You just fall with them immediately. And that's part of Giorgio's transformation in the film. I mean, you watch those opening scenes and he seems so happy and you just so endeared to him. And then by the end, it's changed so much. His life has become so affected by this woman.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about how I really locked into the Giorgio character after watching this movie, and I feel like his progression through the story makes so much more sense in this type of medium. I was like, oh, okay, I get it. I understand where he is emotionally and how it's changing and, you know, what he's forced to do. Plus, I will say, again, as a acting note, and this happens in all three versions too, but that like scream he does at the end after the captain is shot in the duel is like, this is like ear piercing. Like he goes for it.
Yeah, I mean, with anything like this, I think you have to, like, something that is this dramatic and intense of a story. The only way to deliver it is to really go in, and I think all three versions of this story do that. Well, actually, my favorite, sort of unrelated to Scream, but still Giorgio related. One of my favorite things about the film, my favorite line in the film, is something that, you know, because we talked about the novel really elaborates on Giorgio's backstory. It really talks a lot about his backstory and his history with the military. And the film skips a lot of that, picks up right with Clara and Giorgio, which is what the musical does. But the thing that the film does even better than the musical is it sort of distills all Giorgio's history and the history of the war into this one line at the very beginning. There's this long held opening shot as Giorgio approaches on his horse, and he's sort of, you hear his voice narrating, and he says that they no longer paid me to kill, but only to train others to kill and be killed. And it really so the whole film, the whole story is we're in the Risorgimento, the unification of Italy. So the war has just ended, essentially. And I think that one line really distills his whole backstory into that one moment, right at the top of the film.
Yeah, what an economical way just to render that backstory or like communicate like his past without having to get into like the very specifics of like, and this is the war I fought in, and then this happened.
It's really smart, and it's a wonderful line. There's another line in the film that he says to, I think he says it to Clara, or she says it to him. I can't remember. One of them says it to the other. It's Clara and Giorgio. But they say, "You will be my religion," which happens right at the front. And I think it's another version of this idea of obsession, of passion that sort of plays through the whole story. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful line. I also love little details. You know, we were talking about the costuming and stuff in the bugle calls, but little visual details that aren't textual details that they took from the movie and put into the musical, like the novel by Rousseau. You know, they didn't really mention it, but you see it. You see it physically. He like picks up the book and it says Rousseau, and I was watching. Oh, there it is. There, you know, there's what she talks about, and I read. You know,
there's that scene when she has essentially like her final seizure. When she's observing him, he comes and all that kind of stuff, and then it begins to rain, and then he like basically covers her spread eagle for a while to try and like keep the rain off of her. I actually really love this scene, but it's like, I don't know, it's like, it's such an interesting visual. It's like, I'm gonna try and keep this rain off of you, and then it's like, well, it's raining too hard. I'm not gonna be able to. This isn't gonna work.
One of the other visuals that's really interesting is it's in sort of that last, towards the end of the film, they're Fosca and Giorgio's big sort of lovemaking scene. It's the first time that she has her hair down, and and it's gorgeous, and she looks almost beautiful. I think it was a really interesting sort of decision on Scola's part to like kind of let her have her hair down and look so lovely like that.
There's so many of these like tiny little flourishes that help just like support the narrative. There's a lot of theory and thought that goes into the making of movies, but this feels like so much like all the heads of production, like costumers, makeup, set design, like everyone was kind of on the same page of like, no, we all have to like do this in support of the story that we're trying to tell here.
It's one of my favorite things to see in a film. I get so excited when I watch a film and everything is so cohesive. There's this one vision that clearly everyone is working towards. And it feels like that for me with this film. Everyone knows what it is that they're making and what the story it is that they're telling. And it's funny, you know, this is not a well-known film. It's not a very famous film.
No.
It was at Cannes in 81, but it's certainly not a known film at all. I mean, we talked about it's very hard to find, you know.
Yeah.
But it is really lovely. It's really well made, and it's really well. I can see why Sondheim watched it and sort of immediately fell in love with it. And something I was reading, where was it? Maybe it was in the Hat book. No, it wasn't in the Hat book. What was I looking at? I was looking at something last night. I looked at something last night where he was talking about, he watched the film, and as it was going through, he said, I could hear how this could be like made into a immediately I wanted to adapt it, and I wanted, you know, James Lapine to do it with me because he's such a romantic, and you can see when you watch the film why he saw this and thought like, oh yes, let's do this, you know, why he sort of loved it so much.
There's certain movies you can watch at times and it just feels like, oh, they should probably like break out into song at this point. It feels like that's what this is leading up to. So, and this is kind of a movie like this. Like they probably should be singing some of their feelings.
Yeah, because it's so intense. All of these, you know, even the intensity of the drama between Fosca and Giorgio, but also the intensity of the happiness at the big top of the film with Giorgio and Clara. It just, you watch those scenes between them and it makes you smile.
Okay, so the one part I need to bring up here, which is something that did not make it into the stage show, and I think smartly, in my opinion, is like the very end when it is revealed that it's Giorgio telling this story to someone in a bar who I am assuming is supposed to be Toulouse-Lautrec, but I don't actually know if that's who.
Wait, I didn't ever think of that. Yeah.
But is a small person that is hearing this story and is like, no, too unbelievable, and then walks up, and that's how the movie ends. And I'm just like, wait,
laughing.
What? Yeah, it's like, what is this ending? Why is this how they decided to wrap this all up? And I don't know if you have any ideas why.
I mean, I think it's a callback to the novel, which essentially is Giorgio. I mean, I think the novel starts with, do I commit an indiscretion by publishing these memoirs? You know, it starts with it is the telling of the story. So I think that's why the film frames it that way too. You know, it opens with Giorgio's voiceover. It's Giorgio telling the story. But I'm glad they don't do that in the musical. It doesn't bother me. I think it's lovely in the novel, and it doesn't bother me in the film. But I think it would be almost, this isn't the word I want to use, but like cheesy in the musical. Like it would be a little crazy to do a sort of, let me tell you my story, you know, type.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad they dropped that for the musical.
I think it's just because of tone for me, is I think you can kind of get away with it here in the movie, although it doesn't fully work for me. But in the musical, because it is so like unhumorous for like the vast majority of it, it would feel like it's like ending it off on like a weird, I don't know, upbeat joke type of thing. It's like, no, this is not what this story needs to have to be the button of the story.
I agree. And I definitely think the movie is a little lighter in feel. It feels a little brighter than the musical. It certainly is. I mean, it's bleak. And I think part of that is when you add music to something, it immediately dramatizes it even more. So you're taking something that is already heavily, you know, dramatized, and you're adding this very sort of neoclassical lush score to it. It's going to make it even darker. I mean, you know, we touched on that at the very beginning. I can only I love it, but I can't listen to it for too long because it does put me in a certain place. It's a really bleak musical.
Yeah, there's not a lot of kick lines in Passion, so it's not something to do as like a little pep up for yourself.
But that's also, you know, I think to your point, like it's sort of what you want at the end of that musical. You want him alone, and that, you know, you don't want the little, and now we're in a bar and I'm telling you my story. So
right. Yeah, it just feels so off in the musical version of this story. It would feel so off to me if that's how they decided to end it. So anything else that you want to bring up about the movie itself?
Trying to think. I mean, those, I feel like I just like word vomited so much of my thoughts and about it with you, but I think one of the biggest things that I was so not surprised at, but enjoyed so much were the parallels between the writing between the lines in the musical, and, you know, even stuff is like, there's stuff that's almost verbatim when the doctor talks about her body is not strong enough to produce a fatal disease, you know,
right?
That there's so many interesting lines that they really took and basically almost put them verbatim into the show. I'm
sure someone has actually done this already, but I would love to see like an extended video or even like a scene or something like that of, it's just the movie but with like the passion underscoring underneath it, just to see what that would do and how that would make it feel.
I would love to see a revival of Passion that looks like the film, that looks as sort of brilliant as the film is, because the film is so beautiful. I think the score of the musical is so beautiful. I would love to see like a really lavish revival.
I'll go one further on you. Not that I'm usually like the biggest proponent of movie remakes. I would kind of like to see an updated film of just the storyline. Like, I'm not even talking about the musical, but just like the storyline remade again. Like, this movie's beautiful. It's great. But I actually think, weirdly enough, like that the themes of Passion are eternal. Having idealized love, of like thinking you know what love is, and then being forced to confront it.
Yeah.
Feels like a very modern thing that a lot of people are grappling with too. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot there that could be played around with, even in a modern context.
I would absolutely watch that.
Get on it, filmmakers. We need a new Passion story. Joel, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day here to talk about this film and gab with me for a bit. You're doing a bunch of music stuff in New York City, so how can people, track you down, see what you're doing?
Oh well, I think we're on a little break now. We just.
Oh, are you? Okay. Sorry.
We did. No, it's okay. We'll have more coming up. We did. Blythe Oath and I did this Sondheim concert. We've done a few of them, and our last one we did on January 16th in the city, and then we got this wonderful write-up, this review from Time Out, which gave us this really wonderful review, and so we ended up doing an encore of it this past Monday, February 10th, and that was really fun and exciting, and we have more plans to do the show again at some cool venues that we're still solidifying.
Of course. Yeah, that's great.
But it's a really fun show. So, if anyone does like follow or want to, check them out, just kind of keep following, because we'll be announcing that stuff eventually. And if you've seen it, if you've been to the show, you'll know that the set list is always different. It's always Sondheim. It's a Sondheim duo show that Bly and I do, but we always try and change up the songs throughout each concert.
And it's great, so people should go and check it out if they can.
Oh, it's actually if you search either of our names or the Sondheim Sessions on YouTube, there's a YouTube channel and it has highlights from all the concerts. So you can also watch things there. I forgot about that.
Because we're not talking about a song here this week, I'm giving it to you to decide on what song plays us out here. It could be from Passion, and I would love it if it was, but it doesn't have to be. So whatever song you think should play us out here this week.
Oh boy, the Fifth Letter. I love the Fifth Letter. I think it's
why is that the one?
I think they're just musically absolutely just stunning. The farewell letter I find so sort of heartbreaking and dramatic, but the Fifth Letter I think is so gorgeous. The way some of the lines just sweep in it, and the happiness theme coming in and out, and I think it's gorgeous, and it's a really good representation of that love triangle.
Cool. Well, thanks, Joel.
Thank you.
Hopelessly in love, and am loved hopelessly in terms in your arms. All this happiness, you and I, being here with you in the dark, we're not meant for each so other. So much happiness. If I seem to imply something more, even more than what I felt before, I apologize to feel your touch again. But since we're forced to be together, when so much time has passed, let us